Hello, General Biology, and welcome back. This is the second in the screencast series, and we're still on section 3.1 of chapter 3, Ecology. And we were talking about the difference between economics and ecology and the importance that protecting our ecological services also helps to save money and also helps to provide income. So we need to make sure that we're taking care of everything. Okay, so we're going to get into the section and we're going to talk about the levels of organization. So when we talk about levels of organization, this is within the biosphere, it's within our Earth, and they are important in understanding for an ecologist to understand these relationships in this level of organization so that the ecologist can help create models and understand more of the interdependencies and interactions that take place. So let's start off with ecological studies focus on these levels that include the following. And the first is an individual organism. And this individual organism can be anything from a microscopic organism to a macroscopic organism. So something small to something big. It can be unicellular versus multicellular. And it can be anything from a plant to an animal, and that includes insects and everything else in between. Alright, so an individual organism, let's just pull something out of our hat, and I'll say a frog. Okay, so a frog would be one individual organism. A rabbit, a cat, a dog, a monkey, just one individual organism, and an ecologist is going to understand everything that there is to know about that one individual. It's going to know all the components, the structure that makes up the frog, the environment that the frog lives in. It's going to be whatever the frog needs to eat. Those are what an ecologist is going to want to know. They're going to look at that individual organism first and learn everything that there is to know about that individual organism. The next study would be a population. So let's say we take 50 frogs or 100 frogs that live in a pond. That's a population. It's a group of individuals that belong to the same species and live in the same area. So they're going to, the chimps, I think of Jane Goodall and the chimpanzees. So she had one group of chimps that she followed, and that was the population of chimps. It wasn't anything else. It didn't take into consideration the birds, the trees, baboons, or anything else. It was just that one individual group of chimps that lived within a particular area. A community is the next level of organization. So now a community is going to contain populations, but it's going to be an assemblage of different populations that live together within that defined area. So now this is where we're going, if we're talking about the chimps, this is where we're going to include the birds, the baboons, maybe a gorilla, maybe some snakes, maybe some plants, and all of those are going to be different populations that live in that particular area. At this level, we're going to see what kind of interactions take place between those different populations. And as I said before, these interactions could be predator-prey, consumer-decomposer, that kind of thing. So to kind of tie this together, what you need to know is communities contain different populations, and populations are made up of different individuals. So as we're looking at these levels, they're kind of building off of each other. So the next level of organization then is an ecosystem. And ecosystems are all of the communities that are put together that live in a place as well as their physical environment. So now we're talking about where do they live. So when we went back to that food web, and I said that was a marine ecosystem. So we were seeing all of the different individuals that made up the different populations that lived within the communities, as well as their physical environment, which happened to be the ocean for that. So all the organisms that live in a place together with their physical environment. So if I were to say to you, a frog lives in a pond ecosystem, that means that that frog is going to be living with different populations like ducks and geese and different kinds of fish and maybe even turtles. And it's going to be a pond, so it's usually a freshwater pond, and it's a standing water ecosystem. It's not a flowing water ecosystem. So we can give descriptions of the physical environment as well. And that's the ecosystem. So ecosystem contains communities. Communities are made up of different populations. Different populations are made up of individuals. Okay. The next level then from ecosystem goes up to the biome. And a biome is a group of ecosystems that share similar climates and similar organisms. So that means that they're going to have the same dominant plant species and the same dominant animal. Okay, so as I was saying, biomes are going to have the same type of dominant plant species, the same type of dominant animal species. They're going to experience similar climates, so about the same amount of precipitation. And there's about 11 different biomes that exist. We'll be talking about the tropical rainforest, the temperate forest, the northwestern coniferous forest, the taiga, or the boreal forest. So there's about 11 different biomes. The dry desert is another one of the different biomes. So when we put everything together, the biomes, the ecosystems, the communities, the populations, and the individuals, we get our biosphere. And that's our entire planet with all of the organisms and all of the physical environments in which they live. And that's what ecology is going to study. It's going to study those levels of organization so that they can understand the processes, the interactions, and the interdependencies that exist with them so that we can better maintain our natural resources. So there's some terms that you're going to need to know, and two of those terms are biotic and abiotic factors. So that's going to be one of the key concepts that we're going to see in this next part of Section 3.1. We're going to consider the biological influences on the organisms that we're going to identify as biotic factors. And then we're going to try to understand the physical components of that ecosystem that are called the abiotic factors. So just a little hint here, anytime you put A in front, it means without as far as science is concerned. So if it's sexual, then it reproduces with a male and a female. If it's asexual, that means that they don't have that interaction between a male and a female. It's without. So we'll talk about photic, which means light, versus aphotic, which means no light. So this abiotic is going to stand for the same thing when we take a look at these terms. Okay, so let's consider biotic factors. And biotic factors is anything that, or abiotic factors, oops, it skipped ahead, sorry. Biotic factors is anything that is going to be the living part of the environment. So the grasses that you see here, the bird that you see here, the trees, the other birds that you see flying. There's a little fish inside of here, the lily pads. Anything that is alive is biotic, and that's what biotic means. Bio means life. So these are living factors. So when we talked about the frog earlier, so using that as an example, the biotic factors relating to a frog might include the algae that it eats when it's a tadpole, the herons that eat the bullfrogs, so this is a heron, and other species that might compete for food and space with it, like the birds and the fish. So biotic factors are anything, animals, plants, mushrooms, bacteria, all of those are biotic factors. Abiotic factors is anything that is non-living. It's the non-living physical part of the environment. So abiotic, without life. There's not going to be life. So this can even include your climate, the sunlight, the heat, the amount of precipitation, the humidity, the wind, the water currents, the soil type. Okay, all of that. If there's clay or stones, it could be the depth of the water. It could be the chemistry of the water. Okay, so all of those are examples of the abiotic factors. So when we consider that bullfrog again as our example, the abiotic factors could be the water availability, the temperature of the water, the pH of the water, the amount of humidity, the chemistry of the water. Is it fresh water versus salt water? So when you take a look at this picture, there's nothing living within this picture. It's all non-living, and that's what the abiotic factors are. So when we put the biotic and abiotic factors together, we get the environment, and we get the systems that organisms interact and depend on. So it says here the difference between the abiotic and biotic factors is not always clear. Abiotic factors can be influenced by the activities of the organisms and vice versa. So if an organism has a particular role in that environment, then it can actually change the abiotic factors. A good example is our bison, our buffalo. When our bison kind of want to cool off and clean off, they'll just kind of roll over in the dirt, and they will create these little pits or wallows in the ground. And when it rains, then that's going to fill up, and that's going to wind up becoming a puddle that's going to have all sorts of microscopic organisms. Wait till you see the lab that we're going to do here, and you're going to be creating much the same things. So when we take a look at pond muck, it contains non-living particles, and it also contains mold. It contains decomposing plant material, and that will serve as food for bacteria and fungi that are also in it. So we are going to be making these communities in lab, and we're going to be coming back and looking at them for a 2-week period. And when you first start, you're not going to see anything living, and then as it goes along, you're going to see a lot of life teeming in it, and you're going to then see that life go away because carrying capacity has been reached within the containers that you're going to use. Okay, so that's the difference between the abiotic and the biotic factors. So as we consider our environment, trees and shrubs also affect the amount of sunlight on the shoreline, so they have a role. They also can help to regulate the range of temperatures that are experienced within the area. Having a lot of trees kind of keeps the area cooler. It helps with the humidity in the air and the chemical conditions of the soil. So when you have a dynamic mix of biotic and abiotic factors, this is what is going to shape your environment and decide the features of your environment. All right, we're running out of time in the screencast. We'll talk about ecological methods in the next one. See you in a few.